In the winter of 1882, every child in Lowell knew the rule: never walk past the red-doored house on Gorham Street after sundown. They didn't know why. No one had told them. But children have an ear for unspoken laws, and this one passed between them in half, whispers and pale stares. The house itself wasn't particularly grand. It sagged slightly in the middle, its shutters hung at uneven angles, and ivy had clawed its way up the eastern wall as if trying to throttle it. But what set it apart was the silence, the unnatural, choking quiet that pooled around it like fog. No birds perched on its roof. No wind ever seemed to touch its creaking porch swing. And if, by chance, you stood close enough, you could hear it breathing. Dr. Malcolm Varek didn't believe in curses. He believed in blood, in bones, in the decay of tissue and the limits of sanity. When he arrived in Lowell that November, fresh from Boston with a head full of accolades and a mind sharpened by surgical dissection, he considered superstition a symptom of unmedicated psychosis. But he'd never met a family like the Bordens. He was first summoned by telegram, urgently, no diagnosis, no preamble. Just a name and an address, written in an uneven scrawl that bled through the yellowed paper. The handwriting had pressed so hard against the page, it tore. His housekeeper later said the wire had smelled of burnt meat. He laughed at that then. He didn't laugh much after. When he arrived at the Borden residence, it was nearly dusk. Fog curled low over the streets, a clinging, thick mist that muffled hooves and made lanterns appear as trembling ghosts in the distance. The red door loomed before him, paint peeling like dried blood under fingernails. A brass knocker in the shape of a lion's maw hung motionless, but before his hand could touch it, the door creaked open. No one stood behind it. The foyer reeked of wax and spoiled lavender. Candles lined every ledge, their flames low and flickering, though there was no draught. The air felt thick, humid, as though the house had exhaled its last breath and left it hanging. A tall mirror faced the entrance, its surface cracked diagonally, as though something had struck it from within. Behind him, the door clicked shut with a finality that made his throat tighten. He called out, voice echoing up the staircase. No answer. Just the steady, rhythmic sound of a metronome ticking in a room unseen. Then came the whisper. It wasn't a word, just a tone, a sharp intake of breath like someone about to confess a murder. He spun, but nothing moved. The shadows, though, seemed to lean closer. In the drawing room, he found Mrs. Prudence Borden sitting upright in a velvet armchair, hands folded neatly in her lap. Her eyes were open but empty, irises glazed like frozen ponds. The skin beneath her fingernails was torn and raw, as though she'd clawed at something desperately, and lost. She didn't speak when he addressed her, but as he approached to check her pulse, she whispered something so soft he barely heard it. What brought her back wrong? A thud from upstairs froze his blood. Not footsteps, something heavier. A dragging sound, as if wet cloth was being pulled across floorboards. He glanced at the banister, a handprint smeared down the railing, dark, slick, and unmistakably fresh. The house was not empty. In his notes, Dr. Varek would later describe that first visit as a clash of sensory impossibilities. Time, he said, behaved strangely within the Borden home. He entered at 16:14 p.m., per his pocket watch. When he checked again, only minutes later, it read 700 U3, and yet the sun remained fixed on the horizon. The metronome's ticks grew louder in irregular bursts, until it sounded like a second heartbeat inside his skull. He didn't see the daughter that night. Not at first. Instead, he found the diary. It was left open on the floor of the upstairs nursery, nestled between a circle of extinguished black candles. The pages were warped by moisture, but the ink remained stark. The first entry was dated October 11th, just 3 weeks prior. Mother says silence is the only language they understand. Father disagrees. He says they need names. We fought again tonight. I heard the girl under the floorboards laugh. Dr. Virek closed the book, disturbed, but dismissive. The child, he assumed, suffered from vivid hallucinations, likely early onset schizophrenia. He would recommend an asylum, one with gentle care, somewhere rural. That was before he entered the attic. He never meant to. He'd been searching for the housemaid, a young Irish girl named Maura, who hadn't reported to town for weeks. Her quarters were small, just off the kitchen. But the door was nailed shut from the inside. When he finally forced it open, the air that spilled out nearly knocked him down. It stank of iron, vinegar, and something sore, something decaying in a slow, deliberate way. The floorboards were scratched, not just scraped but ate, as if someone had used their nails to write something. The same words, over and over. She won't stay buried. The room was empty, but in the corner, a wooden ladder extended into the ceiling. The attic. The rungs were sticky, not with sap, not with dust, something darker. He climbed anyway. Later, he would say he felt watched, not from above, but from within, like the house itself had grown eyes. In the attic, there were no windows, no furniture, just a circle of chairs facing inward, 9 of them, one still rocking. He didn't remember descending. One moment he was there, staring at the circle, and the next he was in the foyer again, his hands trembling, the metronome finally silent. Mrs. Borden was gone. He stumbled into the street, drenched in sweat. A neighbor later testified that he had claw marks on his throat and spoke only in Latin for 2 hours straight. Dr. Virek would claim no memory of this, but he didn't leave town. Something had hooked into him. He returned the next night, and this time he saw the daughter. She stood at the top of the staircase, barefoot, her pale blue nightgown soaked at the hem, as if she'd walked through a flooded field. Her hair was long and black, matted in strands that clung to her cheeks. She said nothing, didn't blink, just stared down at him with eyes too large for her face, their whites gone the color of old parchment. For a full minute, neither of them moved. Then she turned and walked silently back down the hall. He followed, though every cell in his body screamed not to. The floorboards beneath his boots groaned in protest, and the air thickened the further he ascended, as if the staircase were swallowing him whole. He called her name, Clara Borden, though he wasn't sure why. He had never been told her name. It simply occurred to him, unbidden, like a memory not his own. At the end of the hall was her room. The door was ajar. He pushed it open and was greeted by an overwhelming scent of salt and mildew. Clara was not there, but the walls, every inch of them, had been painted with ink and ash in looping, frantic patterns that spiraled inwards. At the center of the spiral was a symbol, an open eye, stitched shut with thread. Below it, the word ANWRAHL. In his later correspondence with the Massachusetts Psychological Society, Dr. Virek would describe this room as a perceptual anomaly. The floor sloped upward, but gave no resistance to gravity. The walls felt closer than they appeared. He swore that he could hear music, distant and dissonant, as if underwater. A chorus of glassy, childlike voices humming in a key just slightly wrong. On the bed lay another journal, smaller. This one bound in tattered green cloth, its edges singed. It began with a single line, dated a full year earlier than the first. Mother died in the Séance, but something else came back instead. The entries that followed traced Clara's descent. She wrote of voices in the walls, of birds flying backwards outside her window, of a mirror that showed not her reflection, but a version of herself with no eyes, no mouth, just smooth skin stretched taut. She spoke of her father's obsession with a book he kept locked in his study, the Ninefold Veil. And always, the same phrase returned like a mantra. She won't stay buried. By the time Dr. Virek reached the final entry, his hands were shaking. The ink had changed. no longer black, but a deep, ruddy brown that flaked at the edges. I saw her again tonight. Not Mother, not anymore. Her fingers are too long, and they bend backwards. She asked me to join her in the circle. Said we could finish the ritual. Said I wouldn't have to be alone. I want to believe her. But her eyes aren't kind anymore. Below that, the last words were scrawled in a frantic hand. I miss my real mother. The scream came suddenly, not from the room. From beneath the floorboards. It was a child's scream, piercing, ragged, and far too long to be natural. He dropped the journal and backed away. The floor shifted under his feet. A dull knocking began from beneath, slow and rhythmic. Then a second knock answered it from the ceiling above. He turned to flee, and Clara stood in the hallway once more, staring at him, her mouth open too wide, as if dislocated. She said a single word, "Downstairs." And just like that, she was gone. In the parlor, the fire had been lit. Despite no wood in the hearth, the flames burned blue. The chairs were arranged in a circle now, 9 of them, and this time they weren't empty. Figures sat motionless, hooded and pale, faces obscured by lace veils. Their hands were joined. In the center of the circle was a stone basin filled with something thick and black. The smell was sweet, like molasses left too long in the sun. It clung to the back of Dr. Verrick's throat and made him gag. One of the veiled figures turned slowly to face him. Beneath the veil, no eyes, just a mouth, stitched shut in the same spiral pattern painted on the walls upstairs. A voice, Norris, filled the room. It spoke from nowhere, or everywhere, low, wet, resonant. You came. You crossed the veil. You cannot leave unchanged. Dr. Verrick stumbled back, but the door behind him was no longer there. Just more wall, more veils. The figures began to hum, soft, guttural, like breath caught in the throat. The fire pulsed, and Clara was suddenly in the circle, kneeling, her hands outstretched, palms cut and bleeding. She looked up at him. "It's not a séance," she whispered. "It's a binding, and I think I've gone too far." Then her face changed. Not morphed, not shifted, just emptied, as if whatever had animated her was now gone, leaving only skin and bone held together by ritual. The humming stopped. The veils fell. What sat beneath them weren't corpses. They weren't human either. Their skin was gray, but moved like wax in heat. Their limbs were long, stretching impossibly, fingers trailing the floor like strings of kelp. Where their faces should have been, there were only spirals that spun. Dr. Verrick lost time again. The next moment he remembered, he was outside, standing in the snow, the red door behind him shut, locked. Smoke still poured from the chimney, but the house looked smaller now, sunken. He ran to the constable, tried to explain. He was arrested for public disturbance. Later that night, the Borden house burned to the ground. But that was not the end. It was only the end of what could be proven, what came after lives only in documents hidden deep in medical archives, sealed letters from desperate men, and a single surviving audio recording made in 1919 by a woman who called herself Clara Verrick. She claimed to be the daughter of Dr. Malcolm Verrick, but records show he never married, never fathered children. And yet, her voice, shaky, raspy, old, matches what was heard in Lowell that winter. And she says this: he thought the veil could be studied, measured, treated like an infection. But it's not. It's a hunger. And once it tastes you, it follows your blood. She pauses. Then she laughs. And the recording ends with a whisper. They're still sitting in the circle, waiting. The fire that consumed the Borden house was no ordinary blaze. Witnesses described flames that rose in perfect silence, curling without smoke, dancing in patterns that resembled runes more than chaos. The heat didn't radiate outward as it should have. It drew inward, collapsing walls that had once resisted storm and time. By morning, only the stone foundation remained, scorched and bare. But the basement door, heavy and rusted, was untouched. It sat ajar, and from it, despite the ruin around, a steady warmth flowed like breath from an open mouth. No bodies were ever recovered. Dr. Virek, released into the care of a local pastor the following week, refused to speak for 9 days. He ate nothing, slept in fits, scribbled constantly, destroying each page before anyone could read it. On the 10th day, he asked for ink, a candle, and solitude. What he left behind would not be published until decades later, long after his death. The document, recovered from the archives of St. Dymphna Asylum under the title Treatise on the Spiral Phenomenon, Lowell Anomaly, remains sealed to the public, but excerpts have leaked. One line reads, "Consciousness is not the top of the mind. It is the thinnest layer of bark on a rotting, infinite tree." Another, "The Séance was never meant to reach the dead. It was bait. The Borden family disappeared from every known record. No census listings, no birth certificates, as if they had always been a myth." But in 1890, 8 years after the fire, a house on the outskirts of Salem was bought under the name Prudence Ward. The seller described the woman as stately pale and never once blinking. She moved in with a single child, a girl in a blue nightgown who never left the upstairs bedroom. The house was later condemned due to persistent electrical anomalies and auditory disturbances. Locals dubbed it the Humming House. When investigators entered in 1894, they found a single phrase carved into the walls of every room. Webb brought her back wrong. But perhaps the most chilling account comes from a young nurse named Eleanor Bryce, who worked briefly at St. Dymphna's in 1922. In a private testimony later used in court, one that ended her career and nearly saw her institutionalized, she described the final days of Dr. Virek's life in excruciating detail. He had grown silent again, she said, not withdrawn, aware, as if listening. His eyes tracked movements no one else could see. He wept at dusk and laughed at midnight. One night she caught him whispering into the mirror, "I see you. I remember your name now." But when she asked who he meant, he only said, "The one with no mouth. The one who writes in teeth." On his final night, she entered his room to find it transformed. The furniture had been dragged into a circle. The floor was covered in soot and oil. In the center, he had arranged his medical instruments, scalpels, forceps, clamps, into a sigil resembling the one Clara had drawn in her journal, the stitched eye, with veins reaching outward like roots. Dr. Virek was standing in the center, barefoot, bleeding from both ears. He turned to Eleanor and said calmly, "Do you hear the metronome now?" Then the room went black. No candle blew out, no light bulb broke, just black, as if the room had blinked shut. When the light returned, Dr. Virek was gone. No signs of struggle, no blood, no footprints. Just a torn page from his original notes, burned at the edges, which read, "We do not summon the beyond. We remember it. And sometimes, it remembers us back." What followed was a wave of unexplained disappearances across the county. 3 schoolteachers, 2 grave diggers, and a census worker who had been tasked with mapping out old homesteads, including the now missing site of the Borden house. They vanished without trace. But in each case, the only thing left behind was a symbol drawn in ash, etched into skin or carved into doorframes, the spiral eye. In 1956, a sealed box was discovered in a condemned boarding house in Cambridge. Inside were a dozen reel-to-reel tapes, unmarked. The voices on the recordings were fragmented, overlapping, sometimes speaking in sync, sometimes screaming in layered tongues. A linguist who reviewed the tapes noted that one of the voices, female, young, repeated a pattern every 13 minutes, "Clara Borden. I am Clara Borden. I remember the circle. I remember what we opened." The tapes have since disappeared, but not before one final transcription was made. The last words from the final reel, recorded in a hoarse whisper, He never left the house. He brought it with him. And then silence, except for a faint ticking, like a metronome. The question that haunts archivists, historians, and the few surviving witnesses is simple, but unanswerable. Who or what was Clara Borden? Was she a child broken by trauma, the last survivor of a family gripped by cultic madness? Or was she never a child at all, but something that wore her shape? In 1973, a child psychiatrist named Dr. Evelyn Maraud visited Lowell under the pretense of studying generational trauma in early New England families. She stayed in a newly built home near the old Borden lot, though she claimed, in a letter to her husband, that something underneath still thrums at night. On her fourth evening, her voice was captured on a cassette tape. She kept running while she slept. She can be heard whispering, "It's a circle of 9. 9 voices. One is mine now." The next morning, she had no memory of speaking. The tape ends with a knock, 9 slow knocks, then the sound of fabric tearing. Her study was never completed. Her notes included one drawing, a spiral eye, and underneath it, scrawled hastily, "Ainwell is watching." There are photographs, grainy, barely legible things, from a traveling spiritualist fair that passed through Essex County in 1884. Among the acts listed was the singing Séance with Clara of the Vale. One photograph, nearly ruined by water damage, shows a young girl seated in a chair surrounded by 9 robed figures. Her eyes are closed. Her mouth is open. But the truly disturbing detail is this: all 9 figures are facing outward, away from her, as if protecting her, or more disturbingly, keeping her contained. That image resurfaced in 2003, in the possession of a collector of antique occult paraphernalia who died under mysterious circumstances. His home was found in pristine order, save for the attic, where 9 wooden chairs had been arranged in a circle, with melted wax pools at each corner. No signs of forced entry, no trace of violence, just the faint smell of old lavender and burnt hair. Researchers often stumble over the same problem. The records tied to the Borden Séance vanish or contradict one another. Diaries found one year dissolve into ash the next. Public archives lose whole folders. Witnesses recall details in dreams they never lived. One historian even claimed that her children began drawing spirals obsessively after she began her research, despite her never speaking of it at home. There is a pattern, a circle that moves with the bloodline. In 1982, exactly a century after the Séance, a small cult calling themselves the Order of the 9th Spiral emerged in rural Maine. They didn't call themselves witches. They called themselves rememberers. At their compound, raided in 1985, authorities discovered a crude stone replica of a house with a red door and journals referring to someone named the girl who woke too soon. The cult's leader, a man named Elias Grimm, claimed to have visions of a child surrounded by flame and glass, and wrote pages upon pages about her hands that bend wrong. He said the Borden Séance had opened a gate, and that the girl wasn't the one who walked through. It was something older, something that remembered what it was to be worshipped. When questioned, Grimm repeated a single phrase until he was sedated. She was never Clara. Clara never was. It's easy to write off Grimm as mad. Easier still to dismiss the séances, the journals, the whispered recordings as products of hysteria or trauma. But every so often, a story emerges from someone who has never heard of the Borden name. Someone who dreams of a mirror they can't look into, or a circle they cannot leave. Their words echo Clara's journals. Their drawings mirror the spiral eye. And always, they speak of the metronome. One such case comes from as recently as 2016. A college student at Miskatonic University began painting a series of canvases during a 3-month blackout period. When asked about them, she claimed she had no memory of their creation. But on every canvas was the same image: a young girl in a blue dress, eyes too wide, standing in the middle of a room filled with chairs facing inward. She never painted faces, only veils. On the back of each canvas was a name, carved in fingernail. Clara, the girl, Eva Maris, was later institutionalized after a dormitory incident involving what her roommate described as a sudden, deafening silence. When authorities arrived, every mirror in the building had shattered simultaneously. Eva was found drawing spirals on her arms with broken glass, murmuring about the circle turning back to her. Her last known words, captured by hospital audio before she was sedated, were, "She doesn't sleep. She waits." In the space between thoughts, she waits. You may ask, how can one Séance, one family, leave such a stain on time? Consider this trauma is not bound to individuals. It echoes. It seeks form. It infects architecture, language, blood. And when something truly ancient is remembered, not summoned but remembered, it does not come alone. It brings with it the structure it once ruled, the rituals, the followers, the shape. 9 chairs, 1 circle, always inward facing. We think of séances as invitations to the other side. But what if they are also openings for the other side to reclaim? Dr. Varick's last known surviving relative, a woman named Magdalena Varick, lived in near total isolation in Vermont until her death in 1998. In a letter never mailed, found after her death, she described waking every night at 3:14 a.m. to the sound of knocking beneath her bed, always 9 knocks, never 10, never 8, just 9. She wrote of dreams where her skin unzipped and something older wore her shape. She had never married, never had children, but her journals, written in dozens of identical handwritings, claim otherwise. The blood knows. Even if I forget, the blood does not. And then this underlined, Unwal does not forget. The name appears again and again across testimonies. Not always spelled the same, but always spoken with reverence or fear. Some believe it is not a name at all, but a sound, a signal embedded in ritual language, a key. There are recordings of early séances in which the medium, overcome in trance, moans a sound that phonetically resembles Anwal, even in sessions supposedly summoning unrelated spirits. In one chilling case from 1906, a medium speaking in tongues suddenly began coughing violently before whispering, "She sees me now. She's inside the circle. I can't be outside." She died minutes later from sudden cardiac arrest, eyes wide open, pupils spiraled like a nautilus. To this day, her face has been described as exactly like Clara's. Which brings us back to the beginning. The Borden séance wasn't about contacting a loved one. It was about completing something, a ritual older than memory. One that required 9 vessels, 1 anchor, and a circle of willing minds. The problem was Clara wasn't willing. She broke the circle. Just for a moment. Just long enough. And in that moment, something else slipped through. They say children are more sensitive to the veil between worlds. They are also more susceptible to what lies behind it. So let me ask you something. Wherever you are right now, are you sitting alone? Are you sure? Because sometimes the chairs don't start in a circle. Sometimes they become one. If you dig deep enough into Lowell's property records, you'll find a strange omission. A 5-acre parcel of land near the original site of the Borden house was never resold. Not in 1882. Not in the 140 years since. The paperwork exists. It's just blank, no names, no stamps. Just page after page of empty deeds, filed and indexed but never filled. One clerk, in a note scrawled on the back of an unrelated title, wrote, "Nothing grows, no birds. Not even worms. The soil is black glass." We stopped going out there. You can still walk to it if you know where to start. The woods are thick and silent. Trees bend strangely near the center, their trunks twisted as though leaning away. One photographer, documenting forgotten plots for the Historical Society in 1999, brought back 4 rolls of film. All were blank, except the last photo on the final roll. It's blurry, almost useless. But you can make out a shape, a girl in a faded nightgown, standing in a clearing. Her head is tilted, as though listening. Behind her, barely visible, is a circle of stones. 9 of them. In the margin of the photographer's journal are 3 words written in capital letters. SCSTLMUITING. The Borden name has all but vanished from local memory. Ask the average resident, and they'll mention Lizzie Borden from Fall River. But Clara, Prudence, never heard of them. And yet, buried in private letters and restricted archives, there are dozens of references to a Lowell girl with the mirrored voice or the waking eye. One such letter, from 1893, tells of a traveling preacher who encountered a girl reciting scriptures backwards in a voice that rattled the windows. She told him her name was Clara. She told him he was too late. He hanged himself a week later. The church burned. No cause determined. There's a strange consistency in all these tiles, a lingering, unresolved echo. Clara's story never ends. She is never conclusively saved, never laid to rest, always missing, always seen, sometimes in dreams, sometimes in mirrors, always alone, but never far from the circle. A retired nurse from St. Dymphna's, long thought unreliable due to dementia, once described a visitor she received every year on the same date, July 14th, a girl in blue, barefoot, who never spoke but left behind a fresh spiral drawn in ash on the nightstand. The staff dismissed it as confusion, until the nurse died on July 15th, with the word J-O-N carved into her palm. No fingerprints, just 9 indentations in the floor around her bed. You see? Rituals don't end. They pause. They wait. They embed themselves in places, in families, in bloodlines and buildings, and old paper that won't burn. The Borden Séance was not a single night. It was a seed, and Clara, for reasons we still don't understand, was the soil it grew in. Dr. Weirich may have been the first to document it, but he wasn't the first to feel it. In fact, if you trace the name Anwar back through old texts, pre-Christian, pre-Roman, you'll find whisperings of a faceless matriarch, a silent mother, worshipped by a dying tribe in northern Europe. Their records, wooden plates carved with concentric spirals, speak of a right to bind the mouthless one, lest she speak us open. There's no proof these traditions survived, unless, of course, you count the spiral, unless you count the circle, and unless you count the rising number of disappearances near places that resemble the Borden home, structurally, geographically, or simply energetically. Because there's one last thing that's rarely spoken aloud, even among those who research this horror. Sometimes, Clara isn't in the circle. Sometimes, she's standing behind you while you draw it. The nature of this entity, whether it is Clara or merely wears her skin, remains unclear. But every person who claims to have seen her describes one consistent detail: her eyes do not blink. They move like the second hand of a clock. Jerky, mechanical, too fast. One man, a former priest who left his cloth after spending a night at the Borden site, said her gaze made me feel like I was already dead. Like she saw my afterlife, and it bored her. There is fear, yes. But deeper than that is something worse. Recognition. As if when she looks at you, she sees something familiar, something long forgotten. Which brings us to the most chilling twist in the story. A discovery made not by a historian, nor a priest, nor a doctor, but a genealogist. In 2021, an amateur family tree enthusiast traced her lineage back to Lowell, hoping to uncover an ancestor lost in the paper trails. What she found instead was a marriage license dated 1868, joining one Prudence Weirich and a man named Elias Borden. No such union had ever been recorded publicly. And yet, there it was, ink still crisp, handwriting unmistakable. It wasn't just that Clara was their daughter. It was that she was never meant to exist. The marriage was annulled 2 years later under the most obscure legal category available at the time's inversion of will. The reason? A note from the town magistrate, filed under lock and key, read only. Bride reports the child was conceived through ritual, not consummation. Claims she did not birth it, claims it chose her. The child was listed as born. No name, no weight, only one descriptor, eyes already open. No further records exist. But remember the 1919 recording, the voice that claimed to be Clara Varek. That recording, when cleaned up by modern audio tech, reveals something shocking in the final seconds. A second voice, slower, deeper, speaking through Clara, not with her. It says, "We wait inside the mirror. We only need one to see us. So I'll ask you, one last time, before we go any further, have you checked your mirrors lately? Are you sure the reflection is yours, or is it hers? Because if you see a blue dress, it's already too late." The phenomenon began to appear in small, unconnected reports. A museum curator in Albany found a spiral scratched onto the underside of an antique cradle. A librarian in Philadelphia swore she saw a girl in blue walking backward through the poetry section. Though security footage showed no one, a child in Louisiana drew a picture of his imaginary sister, and when asked her name, replied, "Clara. She lives in my closet, but only on the side with the mirror." The stories span decades, languages, continents, all unrelated, all echoing the same core symbols: 9 chairs, a mirror that refuses to reflect, a girl with no shadow, the spiral. It's as if Clara, whatever Clara is, never died, or perhaps she never lived. Perhaps she is a pattern, a memory strong enough to find new hosts. We think of memories as past things, but some memories are alive, hungry, and when remembered by enough people, in the right way, they can become real again. There's a theory among certain fringe researchers that the Borden Séance was not the start of Clara's story, but its end. That what we've been calling a ritual was actually a desperate attempt to seal something away, and that the family, rather than heretical occultists, were guardians, that they failed, and that Clara, whatever Clara truly is, escaped. If this is true, then everything since has been aftermath. Echo, repetition. Not summoning, but feeding. Because the spiral does not expand, it tightens. A declassified CIA document from 1962 describes a failed remote viewing experiment involving children who claimed to see a house with no doors. One transcript ends with a chilling line from the child subject. "She's inside all of us. We are her mirrors." You may think this is all too surreal to be real, and perhaps it is. Perhaps these are just stories. But I want you to imagine something. You walk into a room. It's empty, save for a circle of chairs. You don't know why you're there, but you feel a strange pressure in your chest. You sit, and before you know it, others arrive. Strangers, silent. They take their places. No one speaks. Then, without warning, you all turn inward, and you begin to hum. You've never heard the tune before, but it's inside you, as if you're remembering something you were never taught. And across from you, in the circle's center, a child appears. You never see her arrive. She's just there, standing barefoot, head tilted, smiling too wide. That's how most encounters begin. The memory is never clear, but the sensation lingers, the feeling that something inside you was watched. That part of you stayed behind, kneeling in the circle. Some never come back at all. In psychiatric facilities across the country, dozens of patients, unrelated, unknowing, have reported identical dreams of a girl who sings without opening her mouth. One patient bit through her own tongue during a session, whispering. She only sings to those she remembers. And yet, if you ask the doctors, the researchers, the psychologists, they'll dismiss it all. Patterns, coincidence, shared cultural archetypes. Children latch onto imaginary friends. Patients see what they expect to see. But what happens when the friend isn't imaginary? What happens when Clara expects you? In a sealed Vatican chronicle, obtained through anonymous sources, there exists a description of an exorcism performed in 1890 on a child from New England. The child was said to speak in voices, not demonic, but cold and clinical. Descriptions match Clara exactly: dark hair, blue gown, mouth that moved without sound. The priest who led the rite claimed the child stared at him and said, "Your God has no mirror." I do. The priest died that same year, not by violence, by silence. He stopped speaking, eating, reacting. His final act was to draw a spiral on the wall of his cell, using the ink from a shattered bottle. 9 turns. Always 9. The spiral continues in modern times. In 2020, a remote support group for trauma survivors was shut down after 5 members suffered simultaneous blackouts during a video call. They awoke at the same time, each clutching their screens. When investigators checked the call logs, they discovered something strange. A 10th participant had joined. No name, no image, just static. The moment that participant left, the others awoke. One of them would later draw the spiral on her bedroom wall, whispering, "She's learning how to use the internet." It's laughable, until you consider that patterns, rituals, can evolve. They don't need fire and candles anymore, they just need attention. That's why the Borden Séance is so dangerous, not because of what happened, but because of who is listening now. Every retelling, every curious glance, every skeptic who watches out of boredom feeds the spiral. It doesn't need belief, only repetition, only memory. And Clara, she is the memory that never ends. Somewhere out there, someone is already preparing the next circle. Maybe it's a child whispering to shadows, maybe a collector of haunted artifacts, piecing together what they shouldn't. Maybe it's you, the viewer, sitting alone, lights dimmed, curiosity picked. Ask yourself honestly, why did you keep watching? Was it fear, fascination? Or did something about this story feel familiar? That's the first sign. The second is the humming, low, like a metronome under your heartbeat. And the third, well, by then, it's too late, because she's already sitting behind you, waiting. They say the spiral grows tighter with every telling, that it doesn't open like a flower, it coils like a noose. If that's true, then by now, you're close to the center. You've followed Clara through the darkness, into houses that no longer stand, through mirrors that no longer reflect. And maybe, just maybe, you've started to wonder if something is following you back. In 1989, an underground researcher known only by the alias DV published a bootleg manuscript titled Anwal's Mirror. It circulated through fringe occult communities and was banned from several university libraries after a handful of psychology students went missing during their thesis projects. The book was allegedly a compilation of found testimonies, sketches, dream reports, and psychiatric notes. One section described what it called the anchor event, a moment in a person's life when Clara first notices them. It can be a dream. It can be a word whispered on a street corner. It can be a single, inexplicable thought. I've seen that house before. DV wrote, she does not choose randomly. She chooses where the spiral is already cracked. A mind under pressure. A soul already waiting for a circle to step into. And once she sees you, she does not forget. In the margins of the manuscript, DV included hand-drawn spirals. They were rough, but each one had exactly 9 turns. Under one, he wrote, I heard the metronome in my sleep last night. Tick, it matched my breath. And then it didn't. He died 2 months after publication. Heart attack, they said. But his neighbors reported hearing humming from his apartment the night before. Not music, something more primal. Something like a woman breathing through glass, and the strange part, the song was the same one recorded in 1919, the same one Clara sang. There's an unsettling consistency to Clara's influence, geographic gaps closed by perfect narrative alignment, as though the story is self-correcting, ensuring it always reaches the next listener. Some believe she's not just an entity, but a process. That Clara is what happens when trauma is witnessed too often, repeated too faithfully, and allowed to feed on fear across generations. If that's true, then everyone who tells the story brings her closer, everyone who listens opens the door, and everyone who believes sits in the circle. In one chilling case from 2007, a woman in Manchester, New Hampshire, recorded nightly messages from her daughter's baby monitor. Not voices, scratching, long, deliberate. After 2 weeks, she removed the memory card and played it back on a computer. What she found were spiral shapes drawn in audio wave form. A spectrogram revealed a crude image: 9 chairs, a girl in the center, and beneath it, in distorted, warbling tones, "She is almost here." The child, only 18 months old, had begun refusing to look in mirrors. She would cry and scream, pointing and saying, "They're not me." They moved. The scratching followed. Some experts point to pareidolia, the human brain's habit of seeing patterns where none exist. But when those patterns start responding, when they begin to recognize us in return, what does that mean? In an FBI file unearthed by a conspiracy archivist, a psychologist interviewing a fugitive cult member from the Order of the Ninth Spiral asked a single question: "Who is Clara?" The man replied, calmly, "She is the sound that comes after silence." That answer haunted the psychologist for the rest of his life, and his last recorded statement, found in his private journal, was this: "I saw her, in the reflection. But it wasn't my face she mirrored back. It was me remembering her." And that is perhaps the most terrifying part of this story, because it means that Clara, Anwal, whoever or whatever she is, might not need to manifest in your room, or in your home, or even in your dreams. It means she's already inside your memory, curled into the folds of your past like a parasite, waiting for you to recall something that never happened, or something that did, but was hidden, twisted, made safe by time. It means she only has to be remembered correctly. And now you've heard her name. You've followed the spiral. You remember the red door, the circle, the humming, the stitched eye. That's all she needs. There's another twist, one that even seasoned researchers hesitate to speak aloud. It surfaced in a forgotten asylum ledger, dated December 12, 1904. Patient 31 Prudence V. She was admitted under suicide watch, having been found muttering in Latin and cutting her skin into loops. She refused to speak of Clara at first, but after 6 days of isolation, she delivered a chilling monologue that the attending physician recorded verbatim. She said, "It wasn't a seance, it was a birth, but not of a child, of a path, a thread woven through the skin of time, and Clara is its needle." When asked what the ritual had summoned, she answered, "Not a demon, not a ghost, a mirror. She is the first reflection that learned how to lie." That file was buried, but a copy resurfaced in the 1980s in a manuscript marked Do Not Repeal EKT. The researcher who found it vanished before publication. His notes included dozens of drawings, spirals, veiled figures, and, on the final page, a single sentence, repeated 9 times. "She's not in the circle anymore." Which begs the question, where is she now? If you see her in dreams, don't speak. If you hear her humming, cover your mirrors. And if you ever find yourself in a circle of strangers, sitting in silence, facing inward, get up. No matter what. No matter how much your body wants to stay. Because if you don't, you will remember something you never should have known. And from that moment on, she'll remember you. Some say the first sign of Clara's presence is the air, that it becomes too still, too dense, as though breath itself is being watched. Others claim the scent comes first, faint lavender, tinged with vinegar and soot, the smell of something once pure left too long in a sealed jar. But those who've truly known her presence agree on this: it's the feeling. The sudden awareness that a part of you is no longer yours. That some thought, some movement, was not entirely your own. You'll rationalize it, dismiss it, blame sleep, stress, coincidence. That's exactly what she wants. Because Clara doesn't arrive in a rush. She infiltrates. She enters like rot in a floorboard, slow, silent, but irreversible once noticed. Her story is a contagion of memory, and once you carry a piece of it, it begins to fester, twist, rewrite. And so the spiral continues, claiming not just minds, but narratives. Even history itself bends around her. In a 1933 letter to an associate in Prague, famed folklorist Dr. Helena Moravec wrote of an artifact found in a defunct monastery near Brno. It was a paneled wooden mirror, ornately carved with spiral patterns. When held at certain angles, faces would appear behind the reflection. Faces the viewer couldn't see when turning around. Locals refused to touch it. The monks had sealed it in a wall. But Helena broke the seal, studied it. 3 weeks later, she wrote, "I saw the girl in blue last night. Her eyes had no lids. She asked me if I remembered my mother's voice. I couldn't answer. I couldn't speak. She was found dead a day later, drowned in her own bathtub, her lungs dry, as though they had never held water. The mirror disappeared. Wherever that mirror went, so did the pattern. Homes that briefly held it became the sites of tragedies. Journal entries spoke of whispering girls, of a metronome clicking in pitch-black rooms, and always the same markings on the walls. Not just spirals, loops made from teeth. One investigator who examined 4 of these homes compiled a chilling detail: all the victims, in their final weeks, had taken to walking in circles at night. Not sleepwalking, but deliberate pacing. 9 steps clockwise stop, then 9 steps back, over and over. It's a ritual. The same movement traced in the Séance. The same loop Clara walked through fire and blood to repeat. And every time it's done, even unknowingly, it pulls the spiral tighter, makes her clearer. So what happens when the spiral completes? No one knows for sure, but there is one final letter, preserved in private archives and never publicly released, from Dr. Malcolm Varick himself. A document believed to have been dictated just days before his disappearance. It reads, "The circle was a miscalculation. We thought we were invoking death or memory, but we called something that had only forgotten how to move. Clara was never its name. She was its reflection. The way a scream reflects pain, a mouth reflects hunger. She is not the daughter. She is the door. And in the margins, it's not a haunting. It's an inheritance." That sentence has appeared in other places since then. Graffiti in forgotten tunnels, whispered on dark web message boards, murmured by children who have no way of knowing its origin. It is passed like a curse, a riddle, a warning. But no one listens in time. A schoolteacher in Nova Scotia documented the dreams of her students after they shared ghost stories one Halloween. 5 of them claimed to dream of a girl in old clothes who stood at the end of their beds humming. One drew a perfect spiral in red crayon, though he'd never seen one before. When asked who the girl was, the class replied in eerie unison, "She remembers us." The teacher quit a week later. Before leaving, she burned every mirror in her home. Are you starting to understand? The story of Clara isn't just a tale passed down through bloodlines and archives. It's a shape, a form that memory naturally drifts toward, like iron to magnet. That's why it spreads so easily, through letters, film, stories like this one, through voices and repetition, through viewers like you. Even your silence feeds her. Even your disbelief confirms her. Because Clara doesn't need you to believe. She just needs you to watch, to hear her name, to picture her in your mind. Go ahead, try to stop thinking about the girl in the blue nightgown. Try not to wonder if she's behind you, just out of sight. In the reflection you haven't checked in an hour. You won't succeed. That's how she wins. In 2012, a psychologist conducting a study on suggestibility used the name Clara Borden as a fictional prompt, meant to anchor patients during guided dream therapy. None of the patients were told anything about her. They were simply told to follow the girl. Of the 40 participants, 17 reported dreams of a house with a red door. 10 described a circle of chairs. 6 claimed to wake up with spirals drawn in condensation on their windows. And 1, an elderly man with no history of mental illness, woke screaming, blind, whispering. She turned her face. She turned it all the way around. He died 2 nights later, not from trauma. From silence. His heartbeat stopped mid-sentence during a call with his daughter. The only word she caught before the line cut was, mirror. The therapist ended the study. But she kept the tapes. She listens to them sometimes. She says they hum now. And she's not the only one. Collectors around the world, those drawn to haunted recordings, cursed texts, forgotten melodies, all report the same sensation, that something knows them now. Not watches, knows, intimately, like a former lover. Or a parasite that grew up inside you. A few claim they've seen Clara walk across the footage in the background of unrelated videos, never moving toward the camera, just watching, lingering. These are the same people who begin losing time, forgetting names, waking to find themselves standing in unfamiliar rooms with mirrors they don't recognize. All of them remember the same thing, a metronome. Tick, tick, 9 times, always 9. So the question isn't whether Clara is real. The question is, how long has she been waiting for you? You, the curious listener, the believer, the one who stayed long enough to hear every word. What does that say about you? What did she see in your spiral? Because if you've followed the circle this far, the shape is complete. And the next sound you hear might not come from this world at all. There's a photograph locked in a private collection in Budapest, rarely shown and never published. It's said to be taken sometime in the 1920s, in the parlor of a small psychiatric facility. The image shows a group of 9 people sitting in a circle, some in hospital gowns, others in ordinary clothes, one in a priest's collar. All are staring forward, expressionless. But in the space between them, where no chair should be, is the faint outline of a girl, barely visible. A blur, really. But her eyes are crystal clear. No one can explain how her image appears in a silver nitrate print that predates modern photo manipulation, and no one can identify her, not by name. But you know her name now, and she knows yours. These aren't ghost stories. Not in the way we understand them. There are no chains rattling in the attic, no cold hands reaching from the dark. Clara's hauntings are quieter, more patient. She doesn't slam doors. She opens them slowly. She waits behind them. That's what makes her different. She doesn't want your fear. She wants your attention. In 1947, a small radio station in Maine aired a live séance as part of a Halloween program. They expected cheap thrills, static feedback, maybe a prank call or 2. What they got was 15 minutes of silence, followed by a girl's voice humming softly, without breath or interruption, for nearly 3 full minutes. Then a phrase, one mind. Remember me. The broadcast ended abruptly. No explanation. No tape exists. The recording was found shredded in its real case, the magnetic strips tangled and soaked in something sticky and sweet. 3 days later, the host was found catatonic, mouth stitched shut with thread. He had no history of self-harm. His blood was drawn in a spiral across the floor. This was not the first case of Clara's story disrupting technology, nor the last. A data analyst reviewing security footage from an old textile mill in Massachusetts captured something terrifying: frames that shouldn't exist. In several camera angles, During a scheduled tour, the group appears to freeze mid-step, except for one girl, not part of the tour, who continues walking through them. She wears a dress too old for the era. She never turns to the camera, but the footage skips whenever her eyes should be visible. She vanishes behind a red door that wasn't part of the building's layout. When the analyst paused the video, his screen cracked. He never worked again. The spiral has moved beyond Lowell. Beyond bloodline, it follows story now, memory, words repeated, names spoken, images drawn by trembling hands. It is not a curse, it is inheritance, passed through story like a genetic defect, waiting to bloom. Some have tried to break it, burning the journals, erasing the names, covering mirrors with cloth. But the spiral doesn't need relics. It only needs one thing, a witness. And if you're still here, you've already become one. Let's revisit something that may have seemed unimportant before. The circle. 9 chairs, always facing inward. It's more than just a ritual formation. It's architecture. It defines the rules of her presence. Her threshold, each chair, a vessel, a gate, each mind that listens, a step closer to the center. But what happens when the circle isn't closed? What happens when one chair is left empty? Some believe that's where she sits. Others believe that's where you do. The absence is never by accident. It's invitation. You've heard her humming. You've imagined the spiral. You've pictured the girl in the nightgown, her head tilted, her fingers too long. That's not your imagination. That's memory reshaped, claimed. And here's the cruelest truth of all. There was no Borden say-ain'ts. Not the way we've been told. Yes, the house burned. Yes, a doctor disappeared. But the true ritual never took place in Lowell. It never needed walls or candles. Those were shadows, distractions, stage dressing for something older. The true circle was made of listeners. And it's still forming, one by one, with every retelling. You see, Clara is not the result of the ritual. Clara is the ritual. The circle exists in her, and now part of you exists in her too. It's subtle at first. You'll forget a name you've always known. You'll wake up facing the wrong direction in your bed. Mirrors won't show what you expect. Music will hum out of dead speakers. You'll find chairs slightly moved. You'll hear knocking, but not at the door. Underneath, you'll feel watched, not by someone malicious. Not exactly, but by something curious. She learns through us, through you. Every fear, every heartbeat, every detail you imagine adds dimension to her. She is the first ghost you've ever helped to build, and she is grateful. A letter, attributed to a survivor of one of the Order's offshoot rituals, ends with a warning that chills the blood. When I was young, I was told the devil knocks 9 times. That was wrong. The devil never knocks. Clara does. She waits for the 10th knock, the one you give her back. So when you hear it, the knock on the wall, the pulse in the pipes, the whisper behind your thoughts, don't respond. Don't look. Don't answer. And above all, do not speak her name aloud, because the circle doesn't need to be complete to pull you in. It only needs a single sound, a whisper, a hum, or maybe the sound of a chair slowly turning toward you. If you've made it this far, something in you has already aligned with the spiral. Don't deny it. You feel the shifts, the subtle changes, a momentary pause in your thoughts where her image enters, uninvited. The shape of her dress, the tilt of her head, the quiet certainty that she knows you now. Clara isn't a figure on a page. She's a function, a recursive loop of presence. Every detail you absorb makes her stronger, sharper. That's why her story was never meant to be concluded. It was meant to be repeated. In 1951, a linguist named Dr. Simon Bell attempted to trace the etymology of the word annual, the name so often connected to Clara. He found fragments of it in dozens of dead languages: Sumerian, Etruscan, Proto, Basque. Each time it surfaced, It appeared next to symbols of reversal, mirrors, spirals, words spelled backward. But one manuscript stood out. It came from a monastery in Carpathia, hidden in a codex sealed with human hair and bone ash. In it, the name Anwal was written over and over again in a child's hand, as if copied under duress. Beneath it, a phrase: "She is the breath between mirrors. She waits where language cannot follow." Abel was found months later in a train station, scribbling spirals onto his own eyelids with a pen. He had no memory of his name, no recognition of faces, only a single